We're so glad to see you, and thank you so much for coming on this hot day and traffic day and all kinds of crazy things. So I want to welcome you and thank the Los Angeles Conservancy for partnering with us to set this panel up. And I really especially want to thank Cindy Olnick and Linda Dishman and Frank Escher for putting it all together. Also, I wanted to ask if any Cal Poly students were able to come here. They, good. All right. I just wanted to, this is a little bit on the side, but thank the Cal Poly students that have been working on 10 Lautner houses nomination papers for the National Register. So we're really excited about that, and I'm glad to see that a couple are here. So thank you. And then I just wanted to quickly say that as the John Lautner Foundation's main focus right now is preservation, and that's why I'm so glad that we're able to have this panel on 5 Lautner houses that have been restored in the last few years with individuals that have been involved, and it should be a very interesting panel. And we look forward to your comments and your questions, and hope you would enjoy it. And then I'd like to introduce Linda Dishman. She's the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Conservancy. And in case you haven't seen the Los Angeles magazine, she's in there as one of the top 10 women in a section. I think that's pretty cool.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us today. We know you had a lot of other options, and I think that just tells us how important the work of John Lautner is and how passionate people are. So thank you so much for being here today. We are really proud to partner with the John Lautner Foundation in celebrating the Lautner Centennial, so thank you very much for being here. We want to thank the Getty Conservation Institute, which made possible the video recording that is taking place today so that we can bring this panel to a larger discussion. It'll have life on the internet after today. We're really pleased to be here at the Wilshire Christian Church, which was completed in 1927. Yes, it does predate the work of Lautner. And it was the first church that was built in Wilshire Center. And one of the reasons it worked out well for us to be here is that we're always trying to highlight when buildings are for sale so that we try and find the right buyer with the right historic building. So if any of you here, beyond your work with Lautner, know of any people that are looking for a church, please send them here because we're looking for the right owner. It is a historic cultural monument, so it does have some protection, but we still want to make sure that the right owner is found for this church. And we really want to thank our host, George Leon, and everyone who has helped put this event together. Cindy Olnick was very nicely mentioned, and Bruce Scotto on our staff, who's in the back, has been also doing a lot of logistics too. So please, let's give everybody a big round of applause. I think that most of us in the audience know that historic preservation is rife with contradictions and challenges. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. But I think we all know, too, that it's worth it. And so part of why we're here today is to shed light on some of these complexities, specifically regarding the stewardship of homes designed by John Lautner. Though we're talking specifically about Lautner today, we can apply what we learn elsewhere in terms of both modernist homes and preservation in Los Angeles. Our distinguished panelists have a range of opinions about stewardship of Lautner homes, and we're here to illuminate this great diversity, not judge it, at least not till we get to the question and answer portion. But I'm very excited because this is the first time this kind of panel has really been brought together to talk about these issues. And we look forward to a candid discussion that will help advance our thinking about how best to sustain the built legacy of John Lautner and other modernists in Los Angeles. And the way we're going to be proceeding today is that each of the panelists will come up and present one Lautner house that they've worked on. And they're going to have 5 minutes to do that. And we are going to be ruthless in the 5-minute rule. So you can all help with that. And One way you can help is not to ask any questions, because we are going to have the presentation, then we'll have the panel come on stage. We will have some questions that have been put together both with the Lautner Foundation and with the Conservancy staff, and then we will open it up for questions after that. So if you have a burning question, and I hope there are lots of burning questions, you will need to remember it until after we have done the panel discussion. So if you need pen and paper, please find that now. So anyway, let's proceed. I'm delighted to introduce our 5 panelists who will talk briefly. Remember, briefly. So first we're going to hear from Helena Arouet, who's the principal at Lautner Associates. She worked for John Lautner for more than 20 years and has continued his philosophy in her architectural practice, in the restoration of Lautner's work, and in her own projects. Her work has been published throughout the United States and abroad, and she will discuss Lautner's 1951 Harvey residence. Next, we'll hear from Frank Escher, principal at Escher Gunawardena Architecture and founding board member of the John Lautner Foundation. Bless you. He has edited a monograph on Lautner, has served for many years as the administrator for the John Lautner Archive. He curated with Nicholas Olsberg the 2007 exhibit, Between Earth and Heaven, the Architecture at John Lautner at the Hammer Museum, and he will discuss the 1960 Malin residence, better known as the Chemosphere House. Next up will be Ron Radziner, design principal at design build firm Marmol Radziner. The firm has worked on more than 24 homes by modern masters, including Lautner, Richard Neutra, R.M. Schindler, Albert Frey, Cliff May, and Ray Cappy. Current projects include the Neutra VDL studio and residences in Silver Lake and the Century Plaza Hotel, designed by Minoru Yamasaki in Century City, one that we've been working very closely with the firm on. And he will talk about his firm's work on Lautner's 1962 Garcia residence. Speaking next will be Mark Hadawi, who specializes in the restoration of architectural houses. He has worked on homes by Lautner, Pierre Koenig, Richard Neutra, and Rudolf Schindler. He serves on the advisory board for the John Lautner Foundation, and he co-owns the acclaimed Resurrection vintage clothing stores in Los Angeles and New York. He will discuss the restoration of the 1956 Harpel residence, which he owns. And last, but certainly not least, we will hear from Michael Lefetra. He has restored more than a dozen historic homes in the Los Angeles area. He's also a producer whose production company, Foundation Films, recently produced a documentary on artist Robert Williams. He is a board member of the Los Angeles Conservancy and an advisory board member of the John Lautner Foundation. And he will discuss his recent work on the 1980 Rollins residence. So please welcome our first speaker, Helena Arouet.
Thank you so much. I had the privilege of working for Mr. Lautner and of witnessing how he himself would restore and upgrade his own houses. So I have a particular take on that. The Harvey House was designed by Mr. Lautner in 1949, and it was sort of a mystery house. He never discussed it at all. In my understanding, it was a difficult project to begin with, but in a beautiful site, a leveled site with beautiful views in the Los Feliz, Hollywood Hills area. When the current owners, Kelly Lynch and Mitch Glazer, were considering buying the house, their real estate broker, Crosby Doe, gave me a call, and we all met at the site, and we were in total shock because the existing house was completely surrounded by nondescript, unfinished construction, which blocked the views, and actually the house looked like an abandoned construction site. I will show a few pictures of the way it was. the living dining area. This is some of the construction that had to be demolished. So we started out by doing almost entire demolition of all the additional structures. I was fortunate enough to contact John Lautner, who was the original builder of the house, who had an incredible memory. Consider that this is 1949, 1950. And in turn, I recommended Robin Poirier, a builder who had done extensive work for Mr. Lautner, who was in turn trained and worked for some time for John Lautner. So they contributed to making it come back to the beautiful house it originally was. So here are some quick photos of the way we found it. There were some marbles and granites that I think Mr. Lautner would have never installed himself. From here on, we'll have a few shots of the finished construction, the roof, which was covered in copper by Robin, with his ability to convince the owners into using copper, which was a wonderful material for that. Stone work and glass work, the interiors, the wood, everything made the house the beautiful piece of architecture it became now. I gave a lot of credit to the owners for even attempting it because of the incredibly bad shape it was originally, and John Lautner for all his recollection of every little detail. So we did some improvements, like opening it up. So it was a combination of restoration and upgrade. So Kelly Lynch herself took a lot of her time in our consultations for the redesign, and we always had this little argument going between what it is to improve and what it is to restore. That is an ongoing subject that I'm sure everybody will address. I guess I will finish at this, because my time is up.
Good afternoon. Well, I'm Frank Escher. I'll talk first very quickly about the chemosphere. You probably know the house. The construction, it is a concrete column that carries 8 steel beams that are supported with these steel braces. They in turn carry a wood-framed floor, and the steel beams carry the wood structure, which starts here, curves up to the center of the house, where the wood beams are tied into steel compression ring, and there's a skylight here. This is the center of the house. You should remember this image. So this is basically the skeleton of the whole house. None of the walls are load-bearing. A view of the house, this is Mr. Malin, who commissioned the house, standing on top of the building under construction. The elevation and section, you can see this again, the concrete foundation, the column, the steel, the floor, and the roof structure, and the skylight here at the center. The floor plan, again here the center, there are some bathrooms around here, a hallway surrounding this, and these spaces, these are 2 kids' rooms, another kids' room, utility room, master bedroom, that all face the hill, the smaller rooms, and the big open space containing living, dining, and kitchen all face the view. So this is what the house looked like in 1960, the kids' bedroom with built-in furniture and areas where the beds stood, the living room with this slider that I'll talk about in a second, and the fireplace area. The house had 4 owners since it was built, and when the Tashins bought the house, this is what this looked like. A lot of built-in furniture had been removed, surfaces had been painted, other surfaces had been damaged by water and so on and so forth. And so what we did was a combination of straightforward restoration, reconstructing elements that had been lost, removing layers of paint from this wall, and we also looked very carefully at the drawings of the original house, because it is very important to remember that the house was not completed the way John Lautner actually wanted it to be completed, and most of this had to do with cost reasons. So, for example, there was a very small kind of mosaic floor on the sort of going throughout the whole house. During construction, this was basically given to the family by the Southern California Gas Company, one of the sponsors. So what we decided to do is go back to Lautner's original intent. We installed this slate floor in this random pattern. In other places, we paneled walls that were shown to be paneled on the existing drawings, but they were never installed like that. The biggest change was changing all of the glass to frameless glass, and this is consistent with some of the later projects that Lautner did. So this part here is a movable piece of frameless glass. Other areas were turned into studies. This is the kids' room originally. We kept the original built-in furniture, added shelves, built-in furniture here, changed the bed to have a tall headboard to sleep looking towards the view, because that's what the house is about. Thank you.
So we worked on the Garcia house probably did the initial restoration about 5 years ago. It was built in 1962 for jazz musician Russ Garcia, and it's located, as most of you probably know, on Mulholland Drive, kind of at the top of Nichols Canyon. Let's see. Oops. There we go. The house, and this is one of the original photographs, and I think basically the overall iconic image of the house was intact. There had been some pretty insensitive additions, a lot of just neglect, dry rot, water damage that we found when we began the project. I think our basic intent was to, where possible, take it back to the original ideas that Lautner had for the house. But I guess where necessary in working with the clients, we wanted to bring it to a place where they would be comfortable living in this house and subsequent owners for many, many years to come. So as a for instance, at the entry before the restoration, you can see the bars and going down the stair, which originally I'm sure was just open, but the house is in 2 sections, the bedrooms to one side, living room, public spaces to the other side. So anyone off the street could just really walk in and be between you and your home. So you can see after the restoration, we went to a solid door, but then glazing, which is difficult to read in this picture, to the right of that keeps someone from being able to just hop over that low railing and enter your home. Here you can see the same effect from the bottom of those stairs that separate the house, the bars up at the top there on the left, and the new glazing in the shot to the right. This also shows the terrazzo floors, which in many areas had been badly damaged, and we were able to come up with a new mix matching that existing mix. It's certainly always the goal, where can you match? And then here, the main space before the restoration, after the restoration, generally finding some of the lava rock to fill in areas that had been destroyed. We did replace some cabinetry that had been changed out for some laminate cabinetry to walnut. Here, the canted window that allows you to descend the house on the far west. The original was sort of jerry-rigged and not terribly well thought through. So we again replaced it trying to do something that was just a little cleaner and smoother and hopefully will last. Construction itself, we went all the way back to the structure, really looked at how can we waterproof this house properly, make it so that these windows don't leak, so the roof doesn't leak, so that we can avoid the dry rot problems this house had. And then here the house after the restored exterior, the colored glass panes that in most cases survived, in other cases they had been replaced. We were able to match those colors again and put back the original look. The interior of the house, back to the large open space with the separation to the master on the other side. Some of those other smaller rooms that are located in the bedroom wing. In places like these bathrooms, we did begin with new fixtures, new cabinetry, and really upgraded those spaces as we felt they were not spaces that were instrumental in the overall intent of the architecture, and we felt as long as we worked within their discrete zones, we could take some liberty with what actual materials we used in those spaces. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mark Hadawi, and I restored the Harpel House. The Harpel House was built on a level site in the Hollywood Hills, just next to the Chemisphere House. And this is a shot of the house before I started working on it, and you'll see, how do you do this? There's a second-story addition that was added to the house in 1978, which consisted of a bathroom, a library, and a bedroom. The house was a combination of both very heavily altered and also in bad condition, a lot of dry rot. This is a picture of the house during demolition. The demolition process was probably about 3 months just to remove everything that had been added to the house. All of these beams that create the lattice at the entryway had all been, were all dry rotted from irrigation that had been put on top of them. So those all had to be removed and replaced. You can just see the second story addition there to the left. This is during demolition, the den with a sort of potbelly stove that had been added. There's essentially no painted walls in the house. All the walls were originally just concrete. Everything had been painted white. All the walls had been painted white, so that all had to be broken out and replaced in concrete again. This is also during demolition, the second story coming off. There at the bottom, there was a large concrete and brick balcony off the front of the house that took about a month to remove on its own. This was the staircase going to the second story, wood paneling and ugly. This is the living room as it was when I saw the house for the first time. The cast concrete hood over the fireplace had been painted white. The built-in sofa and bookcase that are where you see the steps there has been removed, and they poured those steps and carpeted that in place of those built-ins. This is a library on the second story that they sort of made an attempt to look like the rest of the house. This is after the restoration. This is a shot down the front of the house where you saw that brick and concrete balcony. This is a view from the pool to the San Gabriel Mountains and the city lights in the valley. The whole east-facing portion of the view was covered by about a 8-foot chain link fence and hedge. So there was a lot of demolition work to be done, and just to get the structure back to a point in which I could start filling in the blanks. I really brought the house back to the way it was when it was built, and went through quite a bit of effort to keep things original, sourcing all original toilets and plumbing fixtures, and having door handles for the sliding doors fabricated, molds made and machined, and that's a restored view from the pool looking into the house, into the living room. That's a view of the living room, sort of a similar angle that you saw before, with the built-in sofa and bookcase, the hood to the fireplace back in its original finish. Thanks.
Hi there. I restored the Rollins house in Balboa Island in 1980. And starting back in 1981 or so, I remember spending weekends and summer vacations on Balboa and walking around the island with my family while devouring the post-dinner Balboa bar frozen banana. And every time we'd walk past Lautner's Rollins house, I would stop dead in my tracks. I didn't know it then, but that house was and is the only significant modern architectural on the island. After about 8 years ago, my parents resumed their tradition of renting a house on Balboa and extended invitations to their kids and their kids' kids to come and stay. One summer a few years ago, as we walked past the house, there was no sign that read, "Wave hello to the Rollins." No sign. No open curtains, no open living room, just weeds in the overgrown garden. The next morning I went to work, and a month later I owned the house. I've been doing this for a while now, looking out for houses in neighborhoods where the buying clientele might not have much or any sensitivity or interest in modern architecture, particularly in Orange County, where red-tiled roofs are the home du jour. My primary concern was to buy the house and get it restored and protected. I had copies of the original blueprints and quite a bit of historical ephemera that I inherited with the house. I spent a few days going through all the material and started to make phone calls. I located one of the original contractors to begin the restoration of the house. There really wasn't that much to do, mostly cosmetic, and because of the quality of the initial construction, the structural integrity was entirely intact. We did have to rework some of the original systems like the passive radiant heat, which at some point had been abandoned. Because of its burned out condition, we removed it and replaced it with solar panels for generating electricity. The kitchen was a bit of an afterthought in the original design. Mrs. Rollins had stated that they didn't want a kitchen. In Lautner's first scheme, he obeyed his client's wishes. No kitchen. Eventually, Lautner prevailed and installed a kitchen, however slight. I replaced the cooktop, which was very rusted, a non-operational dishwasher, and a circa 1987 refrigerator freezer that made ice that tasted like vinyl. Much of the original acrylic material in the bathrooms was greatly worn, and I made the decision to replace it. Most of it was very badly scratched and cracked. I also had a queen-size Murphy bed clad in Doug fir to match the grain of the walls installed in the library guest room. I replaced the carpet, which had a tendency to hold on to dirt and moisture, especially at the ocean, with cork. Many of the motors had to be reworked to get them running correctly. There are motors for opening the windows on the top sides of the house for ventilation, and a giant semi-exposed one for the front opening glass wall on the waterfront side of the house. The elevator that Lautner had specified also had to be reworked. The electricity servicing it was a little dicey, and after it had stopped a few times with people in it, myself included, we rebuilt the motor and redid the electrics, and no one's gotten stuck since. The elevator was installed at Lautner's request because, while the Rollins were in good health and relatively young at the time of construction, he foresaw a time when the elevator might come in handy. Once the house was complete, I would occasionally go down there and spend weekends there. One of my favorite things to do is to hang out upstairs on a Bertoia chair and listen to the comments of the passerby. They range from "what a gorgeous house" to "the new owner should have torn it down." After the house received its landmarked monument status, I decided it was time to sell it. The current economy has thus far prevented me from doing so, and each time I go to Balboa, I have thoughts of maybe hanging on to it so I can perhaps continue the tradition that my parents started so many years ago. Thank you.
that was great, and let's give our panelists one more big round of applause. Not only were they sharing fascinating information about these 5 houses, and they'll be going up to the panel, our panel, please, but they all stayed within the 5-minute time period, which I have to tell you, the smart money was not on that today. So thank you all very much. We really do appreciate that. So if you guys will go upstairs, up to the on stage, and we'll start our. So I think we'll start with a question. I think you could tell from each of the presentations, every single one of these projects was different. And what made it different, and kind of what did you all learn from that? So the first question is, what was your most difficult decision during the project? What did you learn from the process, and would you take the same approach if you did it again? Why don't we start with Frank?
Is this on? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, as I mentioned in the presentation, the house wasn't completed the way John Lautner wanted it to be completed, and so. Well, I can't speak up, but maybe this is better. Good. Okay, and so I think that the most difficult decision for us was whether we should take the house back to what it was like in 1960, even though this did not represent what Lautner wanted the house to be, or whether we should make changes to the house. And I didn't mention that in the presentation, but we had the good fortune of being able to talk to Leonard Malin, the original client. We also talked to Guy Siebert, who was the project architect who worked on that house and also on Silvertop and other houses. And of course, we had long discussions with the owners, the Taschens. And from all of these discussions, we concluded that it actually didn't make sense to take the house back to a condition that wasn't what the house was meant to be. And from then on, we really sort of looked at every sort of aspect of the house very, very carefully, and sort of to make decisions whether the cabinets should be restored, which we did because they were mostly intact, and we didn't mind seeing traces of history, to making decisions that the floor should be replaced. And this probably made the whole project a bit more complex, but very, very interesting. And I really would not make, I would not approach this project any different now, simply because of where it started. But I also think that we have to understand that every project is different.
Great, Michael?
I have the added benefit or challenge, depending on how you look at it, of usually doing these for myself, or at least I lull myself into thinking that I'm doing it for myself. With the Rollins, the only thing that I might have changed looking back is there was a radiant heat system which was heated passively on the roof. And there was a giant stainless steel cistern that was buried in the floor of the garage. And that stainless steel cistern had split. And we started talking about, okay, so where does the storage for the radiant heated water, where does no, it's not going to work. And I still, if I were to do it again, I probably foolishly would try to fix that. So.
Helena.
Well, in my case, I was quite familiar with Mr. Lautner's work, obviously. So my first question to myself was, well, what would have Mr. Lautner done here? And I trusted myself to pretty much know what he would do there. And it was fairly simple. I would say we did not run in any particular difficulties other than just the actual work, which is normal. And unfortunately, there is still a wing that contains the kitchen and the carport that has not been restored. So I'm anxious to be able to complete this job at some time.
Great. Mark.
I think you know, what was a difficult decision was maybe really only a difficult decision financially, and that was that it would have been great after spending all of that money on the house to save or to keep the 1,000 square feet that the second story added, although I knew from the time I bought the house that that had to go. So, you know, I think from my standpoint with the house and with the approach that I took to restoring the house, I really put my faith in what John Lautner did originally, and I used the blueprints as a roadmap, and you know, between the blueprints and archival photographs and, you know, sort of trace evidence, I let the house be what it was originally, and it was you know, it was interesting to see because the house was so ugly when I got there, and everyone thought so. I mean, it was just you know, I met in the very early on, I think before I even started working on the house there with Judy and Carol and Frank, and we kind of like, you know, walked through the house and cringed at all of the atrocities that had happened over the course of really 2 bad owners before I got there. But yeah, I mean, I think that the decisions for me were easy because they were Lautner's decisions.
Great, and Ron.
I think the hardest decision at Garcia was about replacing the terrazzo floors, because these are exterior terrazzo floors between this living room wing and the master bedroom wing, as well as out onto terraces, and the waterproofing below the terrazzo really was destroyed. So the house was leaking through the terrazzo floors, but there's still something painful about removing something that is original. And obviously we did many samples and felt that we had a great match before we ultimately then did take out those original terrazzo floors, redid the waterproofing, and put in the new terrazzo floors to match those original ones. And it turned out, you know, wonderfully, and they look like the old ones, but I think there's always some pain to me when you remove original fabric and replace with new fabric that looks the same. But I think sometimes it is the best decision.
Okay, great. We heard a lot today about dry rot and different problems with the house's weathering through time. And so I have a question. Is there a reason that we tend to see more replacement of materials in Lautner or other modernist homes compared to like craftsman homes or Victorian homes? So is it a Lautner thing? Is it a modernist thing? And so yeah, why don't we start with Michael?
I can say, you know, my kind of gut response to that is, one of the reasons I like modern architecture is if there's a problem, you see it. And with a craftsman house, you know, I've played around or played with craftsman houses. I've never owned one, but I've like been inside, and once you get past the veneer of the beautiful hand-rubbed wood, yeah, you know, structurally, a lot of those houses are potentially in trouble. And one of the things I like about modern architecture is if something's flexing and it's not supposed to be flexing, something's wrong. And you can usually see what the problems are pretty easily. But no, I don't think, I think it's a function of not taking care of your house. But I don't think it's a function of a deficit on, as far as modern architecture, or certainly Lautner is concerned.
Helena, or keep going down our.
All right. Well, if we try to make a comparison between the craftsman houses and, for lack of a better word, Mr. Lautner hated the word styles. He wanted to do timeless architecture. That's what he was trying to achieve. So in John Lautner's houses, the house itself, it's a very powerful statement the spaces are the protagonists, the spaces and the views, but not so much the little details. In the craftsman houses, you tend to focus more on the beautiful details. If anything fails or sags in terms of structure in a Lautner house, it is because of some lack of maintenance. But otherwise, I would not really see that you can compare.
Okay. How about Mark?
As far as dry rot goes, I mean, dry rot is really a product of neglect or of a failed system or something, you know, that's not functioning the way it's supposed to function. So in the case of the Harpel house, there was actually a lot of dry rot that occurred based on the addition. The drainage off the roof of the second story wasn't really diverted in a way that was proper, and so it was draining onto wood beams below. That house has an integral roof drainage system, which there are 4-inch drains that run through the downspouts of the caissons, and a lot of that system was sort of not functioning, and so the water didn't have a proper get out. So I would say that there's certainly nothing inherent in modern architecture that would cause that. It's really a more function of just neglect, and these houses have very specific ways that certain things are handled in order to achieve a very specific aesthetic. So it's important. It does require a lot of maintenance and staying on top of it.
Okay, well, I guess on the Garcia house and on most of the houses we work on, we're usually the restoration architect and the general contractor. So I certainly feel like I see these things firsthand constantly. I mean, to me, inherently, the craftsman house, and I don't want to live in one, but it's shingles that overlap each other with a big overhang, and then often shingles that overlap each other that create the walls. And it's a very simple waterproofing system. It's simplistic, and I do think that modern architecture, whether Lautner or Schindler or Neutra, it is a bit more complex. They were pushing, thankfully, the boundaries of what space architecture could be, what structure could be, the technologies for roofing, waterproofing, all those things that they were working with were not as strong as what we have today. I think it was harder to do. It absolutely can be done. It can be done very well. I think it takes more maintenance. Look, one of the things I love about what we get to do with these homes now is hopefully we're able to put them back together in a condition where they look like the original architect wanted, like Mr. Lautner wanted, but they will last hopefully for another 100 years comfortably, and we won't get into these situations where a house looks like, where someone could even say, should this be torn down? But we've really put something together in a way where the architect's intent is strong and it's a viable, maintainable home in an easy way.
Well, I think we have to remember that, maybe for about 2,000 years, not much changed in terms of materials and maybe methods of construction. There were different styles, but, people built with brick and stone and timber. And all of a sudden in the 20th century, start to introduce all these new materials. And in many cases, all these architects, they worked with these new materials. They worked with new technologies, they experimented, and Lautner in particular. And we are, of course, now sort of, in some cases 60 years later, we're finding how these materials age. And these are problems that did not exist, even 50 years ago. So I don't think that these houses designed by Neutra or Schindler or Lautner or Wright were built less carefully or something like that. They were just experimenting in ways that, or exploring territory that had not been explored earlier. And every house needs a certain amount of maintenance. Every house occasionally needs to be restored and things need to be changed. It's not different for a craftsman than it is for a house by a 20th century masterpiece. And I think what we all have to do is sort of find out what is the best way of dealing with these houses and what is the best way to sort of make sure that problems that we discover are addressed and don't reoccur, as Ron said, 60 years later.
Great. Frank, thank you actually for bringing up the experimental nature of the materials in modernist houses, and Lautner was particularly known for kind of stretching materials to really experiment and how that all would work. In terms of using experimental materials and often using plaster and different things, is there a life cycle issue with some of these? I mean, what's the life cycle of plywood? And different types of things that are used, and given that the 5 houses that have been profiled today all are valued way in excess of $1 million, so you have a certain expectation when you have a $1 million+ house, versus a small little cottage somewhere. So can you talk a little bit about client expectations in terms of the fact that it's $1 million house or $1 million+, and then as an owner, sort of what the expectation is for that type of house, and is there a desire for perfection versus retention of historic fabric? And let's start with Helena.
Well, much is defined by the original client's expectancies. There were clients who would say, design me a house that would last 500 years. I had one personally who wanted a house to last 1,000 years, and he had a big budget. So definitely, definitely you use the most durable materials you can find, and the most appropriate to the location. So if it's a house right next to the beach, for example, you would spend in, the highest grades of stainless steel, use cast bronze light fixtures, where the cost is definitely prohibitive for a smaller house. So, and then you would use a structure like reinforced concrete. Everything would be designed to last for many, many years. So certainly there is one kind of expectancy there versus another client who just wants a small house, maybe a 1-bedroom house, and all you can use is the basic wood framing, simply because the budget does not allow for more. But still, it takes a lot of ingenuity to do something good, with that small scale. And certainly all materials have a certain expected life. So otherwise, the best they can do is maintain it. But remember that many of Lautner's houses were designed in the end of 1940s. So it's been 60 years. It's far beyond what you would normally expect in a house.
Okay. Mark, and I'm just going to remind the panelists to speak into the microphone so we can get the video on this with all of your words.
I would say that as far as the client's expectation of the longevity of materials or a house would fall largely on the client themselves in the end, because I know what it takes me every year to maintain my house and to stay on top of things and to make sure that it doesn't fall into a state where there's a leak somewhere or there's paint that's failing that's causing the wood to get wet, and it's a yearly maintenance thing. I mean, it's a monthly maintenance thing in some cases, and so, obviously to be in the place we are, and you can look at one of these houses in a way where it's sort of almost more idealized than it was in the time it was built. We may look at that differently. I don't think that the Harpels were staying after the house in the same way that I stay after the house, but I do think it largely falls on the steward of the house.
Well, I think that, if you think about perfection, the client's desire for perfection versus historic fabric, often I think that they're one and the same, that if you really want perfection, some clients, for a lot of people, to me, that means you're going to save as much of the historic fabric as possible, which often is the most expensive route versus replacement. It's the greatest when you have that situation where the client really wants to go to that degree to really preserve and but put it together in such a way where we're able to maintain it indefinitely. I think it's really, sadly, often it's easier to go those other routes of replacement versus the historic one. And I think the other element often, when you get to perfection, forgetting the materials, is just someone's desire, a client's desire to maintain some addition that was added to the house subsequent to the original architect's work. I think that's the one that's hardest personally to deal with, where some of these houses are quite small and they want to keep something, and boy, when we can convince them to lose it for the sake of the historic fabric, I'm always happiest.
Frank?
Well, I think a lot of the points have already been made, but I think it kind of shows you how each project really is different from the other. I mean, it depends on what the house was originally, how the house was maintained, who owns the house now, what they are trying to do with the house. Some people they really just want to live in the house. Other people will look at the house as as a museum object. So I think once you go through all these sort of different sort of conditions, you realize that every project has to be approached in a different way, and which makes it really interesting, but also very challenging. And also you realize that you either have to have a lot of patience or really good people on board, or a lot of money, or maybe all of the above. But I think the most important thing is that people have to understand how important it is, that every decision they make on a house really has to be sort of weighed very carefully, and it has to fit into an overall sort of strategy, what is best for a house.
Great. And Michael?
It's kind of a proverbial chicken or the egg issue too, I think. When I look at a project, I start thinking about, is this about materials or about an idea? And I think you can rationalize sometimes if you don't want to if you don't want to save a lot of historical material, that, oh well, we're just trying to preserve the idea. But in all honesty, like not so much with Lautner, but like with Schindler, when we replaced the boards on the Howe House, I had a lot of sleepless nights about it. But those are 30-foot spans, sometimes longer, and you could press your finger through the wood. And when we got right down to historical, fabric, we there'll be a time, obviously, when you're not going to be able to get those beams anymore. And in fact, we might have surpassed that. But I think it's almost a chicken egg kind of discussion, I think.
Great. We've talked a lot about maintenance and the need to maintain these structures, and we've talked about owner intent. So in terms of your work with these houses, and all of you, are well respected within the preservation community, have you, in your experience, been working on a house, is there a point that there's a tipping point, that there is so much historic fabric that has been removed and replaced that this is no longer a historic house? And I'm going to make it really easy on you. You can answer yes or no. And it doesn't have to be your own example of a house, but just in terms of the concept, is there a tipping point when a house is no longer a historic resource? And let's start with Mark.
No.
Yeah, no.
Frank?
No.
I'm going to say yes, just 'cause.
And Helena?
I would say no.
Okay. That was very illuminating, wasn't it? One of the things that I find so fascinating about the work of the modernists, particularly John Lautner, is that there is an inherent irony in the preservation of modern masterpieces, because modernism sought to break away from the past. And here we are now celebrating the past. Is it still modern, and how do you think Lautner would approach preservation of his designs? And let's start with Ron.
Okay, well, I often, yeah, it's interesting. I think about that sometimes, and I really believe in the cases of some of these homes, especially someone like John Lautner, that sometimes I really feel they were just completely experimental, and that living as they were in this Cold War situation, post-World War II building, that, you know, they may have just thought, hey, none of us are going to be around in 30 years. Let's just push it and experiment, and maybe these houses, maybe longevity isn't the issue. Let's push the idea of what architecture is about. So, you know, I think they'd be, maybe not John Lautner, because I mean I remember seeing him lecture. So he's someone who somehow to me is he's in the recent past at least. But I think for some of these people, I think they'd be just shocked that we're having these discussions about their homes. I think in the case of Lautner, I think he absolutely understood that what he did was very important, and I believe would actually be looking at it in a similar way to the way we are. I really do. I think he would absolutely want his homes to be restored so they could go on and survive another 100 years. I think he would say this about his homes and Mr. Wright's homes. That's probably about it. The rest he could probably let fall apart.
All right, Frank.
Well, Lautner accepted the idea that, you know, the world changes, and he was very open to his houses being adapted. You know, he went back and completely changed the Sheets house with Jim Goldstein. He was part of tearing down the house next to the Goldstein house, and he designed a really fantastic tennis court there. But you know, I think that he was open to the idea because he was involved with that. I think if someone else would have been, you know, tampering with his buildings, he probably would not have liked that. But I think that you know, it's a different thing now that John Lautner died, and now his work has sort of moved into the sort of canon of 20th century architectural history. And I think at this point we have a different responsibility, because a lot of these buildings, some have disappeared, many have been changed, and at this point it's not so much, well, should this be replaced or not? At this point we have an obligation, I think, and we all sort of collectively have to do whatever it takes to make sure that these buildings survive.
Great, Michael?
I don't really think I have anything to add. I think that he might be bemused. I know that Schindler would. I know that Koenig would. I know that Ray Cappy would. I mean, Ray Cappy tells me all the time whenever because I'm working on one right now. He says, "Oh, it doesn't matter." He literally says it doesn't matter, because if I get it wrong, someone else will come and get it right. So.
Helena?
Well, I know for a fact that growth and evolution were part of Mr. Lautner's philosophy. So he always thought that his houses could be improved, and he improved them. And one primary example is the house that Frank mentioned, the Sheets Goldstein house, which was improved and upgraded by John Lautner for many, many years. And it became better and better every time. So he would certainly accept that a house could be upgraded to the newest technology. The trick is to know how to do it right.
Mark?
Well, Lautner definitely loved to go back and visit houses that he built earlier, and the Carling house is a great example of that. I think that it's a little bit difficult now, because it's one thing when Lautner goes back and reworks a Lautner house, and it's another if someone else goes back and reworks a Lautner house. So, in a situation where something didn't happen because of a budget constraint, then that's understandable. And I think that I think it's important to work with what he left behind, and not deviate too much from that. And he certainly liked to see things change, but I think he liked to see things change under his direction.
Great. Michael, you raised the issue of putting in solar panels in your restoration of the Rollins house. I think it would be important to talk a little bit about sustainability, because there were ways in which Lautner designed these houses that they did have sustainability built in, and there are other ways that we have changed our perceptions of sustainability now, particularly in terms of windows. And there are usually a lot of windows in Lautner houses. Could you talk a little bit, and Michael, we'll start with you since you already have halfway answered the question, but could you talk about sustainability in these houses and how you have worked in your projects toward that?
We just do it. It's the right thing to do. I think that if you can afford to put solar panels on a house, why in God's name would you not do it? It just doesn't make sense to not do it. So, like a perfect example would be the Koenig house that I'm building in Malibu. It's his last project, and we're just about finished. And we designed it specifically to have solar panels. And there's just a little bit of reveal from the deck. You can just see a little bit of the solar panel, just to let the general public know we did that. So they're not ugly, but it's clear that those are there. And I think that if you can afford to put solar panels on your house or do geothermal heating or whatever it is you want to do, why wouldn't you do that? It just seems like the right thing to do. So.
Great. Elena?
Do you want me to address the same question about the use of solar panels specifically?
No, not specific. No, it's just in terms of the restoration work. When you were working on the Harvey house, were there things that you introduced into the house that would make it more sustainable for the future? We've been talking a lot about the future, making the houses last, many decades ahead. So was that an issue that you tackled? And the reason I ask is because windows in particular are something that there are energy.
Well, the windows were basically restored, but a great improvement was the use of copper in all the fascias, and particularly around the edge of the circular roof. Of course, copper is a very long-lasting material. The rest, the masonry and the stone, are very durable materials as they are. So there was no need for anything else but that.
Great. Okay, Mark.
I would say, as far as use of sustainable materials, only if there was no aesthetic sacrifice.
Yeah, I think I very much agree with Mark. I think I see it, most often in projects would be certainly insulation in walls, insulation in roofs. I think those are great places to go as far as possible, but it's where we get into the glass and the glazing systems. The look visually to go from a single pane to a double pane of glass, even though I understand it would be much better as far as the energy usage of that house, it's a huge visual change, and I think that generally we really push not to have to make that sort of accommodation.
Frank?
Sustainability has sort of become like this sort of buzzword, and for millennia, we were able to build a house that stays reasonably cool in the summer and reasonably warm in the winter. And I think one thing that one has to remember about modernism, and I say this as someone who's very interested in modernism, but there was this idea that you can, you add a bigger heating system or a bigger cooling system, and you can make a house completely out of glass, which now, sort of 6 years later, we realize it's not such a good idea. But Lautner was actually the way Lautner thought about space was extremely well connected to nature, and his spaces really respond and are designed for a very particular site, and so he would take things into account like natural ventilation or shading a glass, in most cases, not always. But so I think that he, in many ways, was probably sort of ahead of the general thinking at his time. But again, not always. For example, in the Chemosphere, we have windows that face south, and we had this problem. We were trying to figure out, well, how do we address this? Because when the house was first built, the idea was that there is a very, very generous heating and cooling system, and you just sort of handle temperature needs with these systems. We added a film onto the windows. We also put in a shading device, motorized shading device on the inside, which is not ideal. Ideally, it would be on the outside. You want to prevent the sun from hitting the glass. And I think that this goes back to the first question. Is it okay to make changes to a house? I think it is. If you have to address questions of comfort, or if you have to address questions of making the house function, in a reasonable and practical way. But as Helena said, you really have to know what you're doing, because you can mess up a house terribly if you don't know what you're doing.
Okay, and our final question, so all of you who have questions out there, start thinking, because after this one, we will be ready for you. And this is just sort of the summation. Each of you have spent a significant amount of your time, and with some of you, your money, to restore these houses. And clearly there is a passion, as each of you have spoken, there is a passion for the work of Lautner. We'll start with Elena, who actually worked with John Lautner, but I want you to kind of tell the audience, what is it about Lautner's work that makes you so passionate and has led you to be such a preservationist for his work?
It is the spirit of each house. I mean, you have to be inside of any of those spaces that Mr. Lautner designed in order to be aware how it affects you. So this is something so powerful that you naturally develop a lot of respect for his architecture and the feeling of the space as the protagonist. The way he brings nature inside the house, the whole thing is just so powerful that I just cannot think of anybody who would not be sensitive to that.
Okay, great. Mark?
He had really had a unique vision, and I don't, not just generally a unique vision, but a unique vision for each and every project. I mean, if you thumb through a Lautner book, it's remarkable at how different each house is, and I think that took a lot of courage to be that diverse. So
I think, Southern California has the best collection of residential architecture, modern residential architecture of any city, I think, in the world. But there's something other than maybe Frank Lloyd Wright. All the rest, they feel like they're coming from some Bauhaus tradition, some European tradition. And Lautner seems to me to be the most original, the most sort of somehow LA-centric kind of. It's coming from this place. There's that uniqueness to the creativity of those spaces that I think really speaks to this city, both the geography and even socially, just what this city is about that makes it fascinating.
Great. Frank?
I think Lautner was a genius. I mean, I really do. And the thing is that Lautner worked in a very different way than someone like Neutra did. Neutra really had something of a style. And there's a certain sort of canon of forms that he used and certain sort of rules of composition. And so, he did fantastic houses, but he always kind of worked with the same sort of ideas. And Lautner's approach to architecture was a conceptual approach. So he's not starting out with a preconceived idea of what it should look like. I mean, he really, the project sort of develops out of his understanding of the site, his understanding of the materials that he can use, his understanding of what the client needs, and so each becomes different. And I mean, if I would have to sort of think of a contemporary architect who does maybe work in a similar way, I would say Herzog Dömeron, because you look at their projects and each project is different, at least maybe at the beginning of their career. Each project is different, and you wonder why that is, and you realize it's not a stylistic approach, but it is really sort of a conceptual approach to architecture, and that I think is just incredibly fascinating.
Great. And Michael?
Frankly, the reason that I like Lautner is when I first experienced Lautner's work, I didn't like it. I felt like, similar to Frank Lloyd Wright, and again, this is my perception at first, this is many years ago, was that there was a hearth and a room that was for photographs, and everything else was kind of attached to that. And it wasn't until I started spending a lot of time with Lautner and Frank Lloyd Wright, frankly, that I began to understand the incredible complexity that's going on with their works. The Stevens house that I own and I live in, I seriously, on my worst day, I wake up, and when I walk out of the master bedroom, I don't giggle anymore, but you'll catch me smiling by the time I'm drinking my first espresso, because it's really, I'll second what you said. He's a genius. It just took a while, and I think it's also a function of how his work was presented for a long time, because the Schulman photographs, as great a photographer as Schulman was, they're photographs, and Lautner's work, more than just about any other architect I can think of, you really need to physically get in the space to really understand it, to feel it. So.
Great. Well, good. Well, thank you, and we're ready for questions. And because we are videotaping this, we do have a microphone for you to speak in with the question. So,
Is this
Cindy,
thing on?
why don't we go to our first question?
Is this thing on?
Yes.
Okay.
It's on. And could you say whether this is to the whole panel or a specific person you're asking the question to?
Mine is to the whole panel, and it's actually a nice segue from your last question. I'm curious, when you're restoring these homes, what the drive is for you. Is it the process, or is it the finished product, or is it the happy client, or what is that for you?
Should we start with, I think we left off with Mark, and starting first.
I think it's all of those things. I mean, if I'm not doing something for myself and I'm doing it for a client, a lot of times it's to, get the client on board with doing the right thing. And, a ultimately, a happy client is great, but, I would say, the final product and the, after that, the happy client.
Ron?
I mean, I'm not sure to say anything. I think it's very similar. I think that ultimately, look, the goal is to end up with a wonderfully preserved house that'll be there for a long time. And of course, yes, along the way, you hope it's a really wonderful process with a great client.
Frank?
Yeah, I kind of agree that it's sort of a combination of these. And, each project really is different. And sometimes it's as Mark said, you're fighting more for the project, and the client maybe, hopefully they're happy, but maybe they're not. But you know that you've done the right thing. But I just think that every project is different. But you just try to address like 17 different things at the same time.
For me, it's always it's about the right house and the right architect. I mean, there are plenty of houses that are in need of restoration in Los Angeles. It's harder to find the house that's deserving of many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars that are needed in order to do it, and then further to find a buyer after you finish making it perfect. So it's complicated.
And Helena?
Well, I believe it is about addressing all these things that were mentioned in the question. So, and we are generally in agreement with that. So I think we can go to the next question.
Okay. Next question. Where's our microphone?
Right here.
Okay.
Hi. Actually, my question is a more general question. With what's happening right now with the Pacific Standard Time exhibitions and the whole LA art scene right now, do you think LA still has that that openness that John Lautner and all these great architects and artists found years ago when there wasn't an art establishment like it is right now? Do you think there's still that openness, and that now that Los Angeles has become a world-class capital and it has establishments and parameters? Thank you.
Should we start with Ron?
I do think so. I think as a city to practice architecture look, I think this is especially the case for residential architecture. I think you do still have an incredible openness to art and architecture among the patrons of this city that I don't think you find in too many other places. Yeah, I think it's very much. I think it's very strong still.
Yeah, I agree, and we actually in our practice we do a lot of art-related work, collaborations with artists, and exhibition design, gallery design, things like that. And I think one of the interesting things about Los Angeles is that it's always, throughout the 20th century, it's been this sort of place of experimentation, this sort of laboratory in a way. And this continues. Los Angeles has terrific art schools. Some of the best art schools in the country, and it has produced this sort of a collection of really amazing, very important, internationally important artists. I think the art market is probably still more in New York than in Los Angeles, but I think there is this kind of openness for new things that you can find. There's also the opposite. There's a lot of sort of people who maybe are not completely interested in contemporary culture, but you'll find that in any city. But I think all in all, and to go back to the Pacific Standard Time thing, I think that this sort of attitude continues and exists.
To kind of append that, I would say also that I think throughout history, people have always grumbled about how the society they're living in isn't accepting of their creativity. And I think that chafing of society saying no and the creative spirit pushing against it and churning off sparks is what makes for great art and what makes for great architecture. Angeles. And I think that Los Angeles continues to be a city with a little bit of a chip on its shoulder with regard to Europe and New York, and I think that's great because I think being smug and secure is a bad quality for a city. So.
Well, I believe that this diversity and openness is one of the main reasons why John Lautner decided to stay in Los Angeles after publicly announcing repeatedly that he would be happy to destroy the city because it looked so ugly. He knew that he would find enough open-minded clients here that would allow him to pursue his architecture.
And Mark?
I'll just keep it short. I definitely think that Los Angeles still has that pioneering spirit that you saw in the post-war building of houses by Lautner and Schindler and Neutra and the others.
Great. Okay, another question.
Have any of you been involved with or familiar with the restoration of the motel in Desert Hot Springs? And if you are, could you comment on how it applies to the issues that have been raised today?
Is there somebody that would like to start answering with the answer on that question? Is anybody familiar with that project?
This is the Lautner's motel, the Desert Hot Springs? Yeah. Can I? I stayed there. I stayed there when Steve Lowe used to own it, and it was pretty beat. He did what he could to kind of keep it up, and I think that the folks, and forgive me, I don't remember, Tracy, I think her name is. I think they did an honorable job, both in taking on. I mean, the sale of that building was complicated. It was complicated. That was a tumultuous process, and I applaud them for having taken it on. And I think they did a splendid job restoring it. I don't know how pure it is to Lautner's original intent of 1940 whatever it was, but I think they did an admirable job. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on the panel on this one? Okay, clearly we don't get out of town much here. So, another question.
Yes, having stepped into many of the modernist, not many, but modernist homes that you're speaking of, Lautner homes and other modernist homes, I think that you're stepping into an experience, a kind of creativity that the architect has created and put there. And I'm wondering, since you spoke of how Lautner homes are each different, when you're bringing a Lautner home up to code or up to modern living standards, do you feel that what you want to do is to kind of look at all the Lautner homes and try to put into the individual home that you have the overall Lautner concept, or is there an experience in each individual home that you're trying to bring out and keep alive?
I would like to answer that diversity was critical to Mr. Lautner's concept of design. He avoided repeating himself. He did not want to create a Lautner style. So, on the contrary, each individual home is a totally unique entity. And the more unique he could make it, the better he felt about it. So you would never think of translating elements from one house into another. Most often they would not even apply.
Any other thoughts?
I think we certainly agree.
Okay. Great. Okay, one more question.
Hi. Just want to say thanks all of you for being here today. And I'm curious, even though we're focused on these 5 or 7 properties that you've personally been involved with, in taking into account all of Lautner's, or several dozen of Lautner's works in Southern California, do any of you feel comfortable commenting on your, let's say, your favorite masterpiece of his here in Southern California?
That's a great question. It sort of goes back to the passion question. So who wants to start with what's your favorite, Lautner?
I'm willing because, I was just talking with Michael about this. It really, for me, is the Stevens house, Michael's house in the colony. There's just such a purity to the design of that home, a clarity to the idea. Yeah, there's just it's just something. It's so strong, and I think we all have to be. I'm definitely willing to say there are some homes that are better, I think, architecturally than others, and we'll all have our opinions about that. But that house, the way the concrete forms come together with the wood and the ocean to one side, the mountains to the other, it's really a masterpiece.
I would have to venture out of California and say the Arango house in Acapulco.
Elena?
Well, they all are favorites because each one is a specific response to an individual site and an individual client. And when Mr. Lautner was asked this particular question, he would always say, the next one will be my favorite.
All right,
You cannot compare them properly, really.
I'm going to go ahead and second what Ron said. I would also say that I stumbled upon. I can't remember the name of the house, but it's the Lautner in Aspen, and
The Turner House.
And I kind of snuck up on it one winter a couple of years ago, and this happens less frequently than it used to, but I started to cry. And not cry like, I'm so sad, but cry like, tears that come from somewhere else. He's a great architect.
Well, I can't really answer that question because it changes all the time. But I mean, maybe my favorite Lautner houses are kind of the Perlman cabin and the Arango house, and the way they both sort of draw the landscape into the house. In the Arango house, it's the water, and in the Perlman, it's the trees. And so when you're there, you just feel like you're part of the kind of universe. Another really favorite house is the Wallstrom house. It's a very, very small, very modest house, beautifully built, all in wood. Until recently, the original clients lived there. And, you move around in this small house and you see how just incredibly complex his thinking is, and the way he deals with structure and material and space. And it is a house that kind of, brings, I think can bring tears to one's eyes.
Great. Well, I cannot imagine a better question to end our panel discussion on. We now have a reception, a modest reception, but yet a reception for us to talk and to really celebrate the work of John Lautner. But our panelists will be here for part of that, so you can have one-on-one questions. And I want to thank Carol Lautner for being here as a passionate daughter, which I think makes an incredible difference in the preservation of John Lautner's work because it's so personal. So thank you very much. And thank you to the John Lautner Foundation for organizing the celebration, the centennial, which is doing an incredible job at bringing attention to the work of John Lautner. And thank all of you in the audience who are members of the Conservancy for being here today and for supporting preservation in Los Angeles. So thank you all very much. And now let's have some wine and cheese.